Okay, so today we're going to tackle a huge question, one that sits at the very heart of one of the most influential books ever written, the Old Testament. Now, this book claims to be about the history of the world, but if you've read it, you know it spends most of its time focused on one tiny little nation. So the question is, why? Well, that's exactly what we're digging into. Let's get started. All right, so here's the mystery we're unpacking. Think about all the huge, powerful empires of the ancient world. You've got the Egyptians, the Babylonians, the Persians. So why on earth does the Bible's story zoom in so tightly on this one nation, Israel? To get the answer, we can't start with Israel. We've got to go way, way back to the very beginning. See, here's the thing you have to get first. The first part of Genesis isn't about Israel at all. It's about everybody. It's about the entire world. And this is so crucial because the book sets up this foundation, this universal story, to show us a global problem that the nation of Israel was eventually chosen to solve. So the story opens with this beautiful, simple statement. God creates everything. The world is pictured as this perfect home, made specifically for people. But what's really fascinating is how humanity is made. God speaks the world into existence, right? But the text says he made man with his special, personal touch, in his own image. A really unique mix of, you could say, dust and divinity. But into this perfect setup, a problem creeps in. A serpent shows up and starts to cast doubt on everything, on God's word, on his motives, even on the consequences. And he makes a promise that is the complete opposite of God's warning, telling Eve, you will not surely die. And right there, humanity makes a fateful choice. And that one choice, well, it had a massive consequence. See, God had said, you will surely die. The serpent said, you will not surely die. So now the story sets out to prove which one of those promises was going to come true, slowly, but with absolute certainty. And this next part is just a brilliant, tragic way of showing the result. In Genesis chapter 5, the author creates this really powerful, almost hypnotic rhythm. He lists the descendants of Adam one after another, and after each person's long life, the same three words toll like a funeral bell, and he died. Over and over and over. The consequence of sin the text is showing us is death, and that consequence had now spread to everyone. So this problem of sin gets so bad, so widespread, that God essentially hits the reset button with a huge flood, saving just one family, Noah's. They get a second chance, and they're given the exact same instructions as Adam and Eve. Be fruitful, multiply, and go fill the whole earth. But, people had their own plans. Instead of scattering and filling the earth like they were told, they all gather in one spot, a place called Shinar. And what was their goal? To build a city and a massive tower, to make a name for themselves and, get this, specifically to avoid being scattered. They were literally trying to do the exact opposite of what God commanded. And this is the turning point, right? God steps in directly. He comes down, confuses their language so they can't work together anymore, and he forces them to do what they wouldn't do on their own. He scatters them all across the world. And it's at this very moment, with the birth of all the different nations and languages, that the focus of the story makes a dramatic shift. The moment after God creates all the nations by scattering them, he does something totally unexpected. He flips the script. Instead of this wide shot of all of humanity, the camera of history zooms way in, from all those nations down to just one man, a guy from a place called Ur of the Chaldees. His name was Abraham. And folks, this right here is the absolute key to understanding the rest of the story. God makes this special series of unbreakable promises with this one man. It's known as the Abrahamic Covenant. And these promises, they become the engine that drives the entire narrative of the Old Testament from this point on. If you get this, you get why the Bible focuses on Israel. So, let's break down what these promises actually were, because they basically become the roadmap for everything that follows. God tells Abraham he's going to become a great nation, that he'll be personally blessed, and that he'll have a great name. But, and this is huge, this isn't just for him. He will be a blessing, and through him, all the families of the earth will be blessed. God also promises to protect this new nation. And finally, he promises a specific piece of real estate, a land for them to call their own. The rest of the Old Testament is really just the story of these promises unfolding. All right, so how did God start making good on these huge promises? Let's take that first one. I will make of you a great nation. You'd think something that big would get off to a roaring start, right? Nope. The text actually shows God's method as being, well, almost painfully slow. I mean, just look at this timeline. It's kind of crazy, right? Abraham waits 25 years for his promised son Isaac. Then it's another 60 years before his grandson Jacob is born. So after 170 years of this grand promise of a great nation, you're looking at a family of maybe 5 people. The whole plan for the world is hanging by the thread of this tiny, very slow-growing family. But then, Jacob's family moves to Egypt, and everything changes. The story just unleashes this flood of words to describe what happens. They were fruitful, they increased abundantly, they multiplied, they waxed exceeding mighty. The slow, patient plan of God suddenly just explodes with exponential growth. And the result? Get this. After 400 years in Egypt, that family that was just a handful of people had grown into a nation of over 2 million. Promise number 1, to make Abraham a great nation, was now fulfilled in this absolutely staggering way. Okay, so you've got the people, but a nation needs more than that, right? You need laws, leadership, a purpose. This huge crowd of former slaves had to be shaped into a real nation before they could take the land God had promised them. And that's when God brings in a leader for the ages, Moses. Think about it. He was raised as a prince in Pharaoh's own court. He was uniquely equipped to go toe-to-toe with the king of Egypt, lead this massive exodus, and guide his people out of 400 years of slavery. And this is where it gets really fascinating. Out there in the wilderness, God, working through Moses, gives them an entire society from scratch. He gives them civil laws, moral laws, ceremonial laws. This is the moment a massive group of refugees becomes an organized nation with an identity and a divine mission. After 40 long years of leading this sometimes difficult nation, Moses brings them right to the border of the land that was promised to Abraham all those centuries ago. And in this really bittersweet moment, he's allowed to see it from a mountaintop, but he's not the one who gets to lead them in. His part of the journey is over. So the torch gets passed. The entire generation that left Egypt is now gone. It's a whole new chapter. And it's up to this new generation, under a brand new leader named Joshua, to finally go in and take possession of the land and keep the story of God's promises moving forward. Which brings us all the way back to our original question. Why Israel? Well, according to the story, God didn't just choose them for their own sake. He formed this nation to serve a global purpose. They were meant to be the channel for his blessing to reach the rest of the world. They were supposed to be a witness to show other nations what it looked like to have God as their king. They were given the incredible responsibility of guarding the scriptures. And most importantly, they were chosen to be the family line through which the Messiah, Jesus Christ, would one day be born to save not just Israel, but all nations. So when you get right down to it, the Old Testament focuses on Israel, not because they were better than anyone else, but because their specific, narrow story was the vehicle God chose for a universal one. It all started with a problem that affected every single human, and through this one nation, it promised a solution for every single human. And that leaves us with this incredible thought. What happens when the destiny of one nation becomes tied to the history of the whole world? That's the epic story the Bible is trying to tell.